The Story of George Washington Carver, written by Eva Moore. Chapter 12, page 62. Tuskegee Normal School was a was in Macon County, Alabama. George took the train to the nearest railroad stop, a few miles away from the school. Two students met him with a wagon. As they drove along, George looked around him at the countryside. The soil was sandy and near the banks of the river. It was mixed with red and yellow clay. George wished he could hop out of the wagon and look closely at the soil and at all the strange plants he saw. As they rode along, George saw cotton fields everywhere. He saw old gray wooden shacks that looked as if they would not stand up in a strong wind. He knew that these were the homes of black farmers. To him, these farmers were still slaves. They were slaves to the cotton crops they grew. Long before Civil War, the South had grown cotton. Cotton brought in a lot of money, and so farmers planted most of their land with cotton crops. But cotton crops were not good for the soil. They used up nitrogen, a gas that plants. The caption underneath the picture. On his way to Tuskegee, George may have seen farmers like these picking cotton. Top of page 64. A gas that plants need to grow. When the nitrogen in soil is used up, the soil cannot grow healthy plants. Like many scientists, George was worried about the soil. If cotton crops destroyed the soil, what would happen to the farmers? George thought it was time for farmers of the South to stop growing just cotton. He knew that most of them grew cotton because they didn't know how to grow anything else, and they were afraid to try. One thing he wanted to do at Tuskegee was to teach students about the soil, how to care for it, and how to grow crops that would not be harmful to the soil the way cotton was. The wagon took George through the town of Tuskegee. The school was a mile away. This school was different from Iowa State. There were no beautiful lawns, just acres of dirt. The buildings of Iowa State were pretty brick buildings. At Tuskegee, there was only one brick building. All the rest were built of wood. Some were not even painted. George could see that there was a lot of work to do. There was no special building for students who wanted to study agriculture. Booker T. Washington had just raised enough money to buy the materials. The agriculture building was going to be a brick building. The students themselves would make the bricks and build it. One of George's first jobs was to plan the building. Classrooms on the first floor, a reading room and a plant room on the second, and a dairy in the basement. George had 13 students that first year. They called him Dr. Carver. Dr. Carver's class had a classroom, but they did not have a laboratory or tools to work with. The students were discouraged, but Dr. Carver would not let them mope around and do nothing. "There's no need to whine. Oh, if I only had so and so," he said. Know it anyhow. Do it anyhow. Use what you find around you. And Dr. Carver took his students out to find anything that would be of use in a laboratory. Old bottles and jars, boxes, pieces of string, rubber, tin, and wire. They searched through garbage cans and dump pot lots. Soon they had a homemade laboratory in the corner of the classroom. Dr. Carver set up a farm on the school grounds. Top of page 66. So that his students could practice working with the soil. 20 acres of land were marked out in small plots. Dr. Carver called his farm an experiment station. He planned to do experiments in growing crops. The soil of the experiment station was not very good. It would be hard to grow anything in this soil. Dr. Carver thought of 2 ways to make it better: put fertilizer in it and plant crops that would add nitrogen. Dr. Carver knew that waste materials would make a good fertilizer and would not cost anything. He asked his students to clear a piece of land and build a fence around it. He told them to put any kind of waste they could find into this pen. Waste, paper, garbage, rags. He told them to put in cut grass, leaves, and manure too. Then the students put some rich soil from the woods and swamps from the waste pile. When it had all rotted, they spread it on the plowed land. Now the land was ready for planting. The students thought they would be planting cotton, but Dr. Carver said no, they would plant cowpeas instead. Cowpeas, he told, top of page 67, cowpeas, he told them, are legumes. They are beans and sweet peas and peanuts. These legumes grow in pods. They take nitrogen from the air and give it out through their roots as they grow. And so legumes are good for the soil. Later, some other crop can be planted in the same soil, and there will be plenty of nitrogen to help the new plants grow. Caption under the picture: the leaves and flowers of the peanut plant grow above the earth. The roots and the pods grow underneath.